Welcome to the Ukraine Chronicles. Ukrainian resistance to Russia's attempt to invade Ukraine succeeded in breaking Russia's resistance and left Putin on the verge of losing the war. While Ukrainians are fighting for liberation regardless of women, men, young or old, foreign groups participating in the resistance have a great importance in this struggle. The most notable among these groups are undoubtedly the Chechens fighting in Ukraine. In the country, Chechen Kadyrov's troops are fighting on the Russian flank, while anti-Russian Chechen troops are fighting on the Ukrainian side. Chechens are arming with the Ukrainian army to take revenge on Russia. Chechens are ready to fight Russian forces as well as other ethnic Chechen soldiers sent to fight on behalf of Russia. So, who are these Chechens who joined Ukraine to fight Russia, and what is their importance in the Ukrainian army? Let's examine it together. Russia's victory in the Second Chechen War, which ended in April 2000, solidified Putin's position as president. Also, this war resulted in the destruction of Grozny, the capital of Chechnya. Many of those who fought in the Russians fled abroad, spreading to Europe and the Middle East, but some were not done, and they eventually ended up in Ukraine determined to continue fighting Moscow as best they could. But today there are 4 special Chechen battalions, at least 2 of which, the Dzhokhar, Dudayev and Sheikh Mansour battalions, have been fighting for Ukraine since the start of the war in 2014. Chechens are among an estimated 20,000 foreign fighters with whom the Ukrainian government joined forces in early March near the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. After Chechens suffered so much torture in their own country, in Ukraine Russian soldiers shot civilians, indiscriminately bombed schools and apartments, and terrorized the towns and villages they occupied. But these Chechen soldiers suffered much worse years ago. Ethnic Russians and Chechens have fought fiercely in periodic border clashes since the 18th century. But despite all this, Chechen battalions still try to support Ukraine's freedom struggle against the violent attacks of the Russian forces on Ukrainian territory. As we mentioned, there are about 4 Chechen separate battalions attached to the Ukrainian army, but pro-Kiev Chechen fighters, especially Kremlin-backed Chechens, refuse to reveal the numbers in Ukraine, citing security concerns. But they say the number of battalions is at least in the hundreds. All of these fighters were shaped by trauma and driven by hatred for Russia. Muslim Madiev, the deputy commander of the Chechen battalion, stated that there is no shortage of soldiers in Ukraine, but they want to join and be part of this war. Chechens say they're willing to pass on the Ukrainian military the knowledge they have gained from this experience of fighting Russia for the past 20 years. Chechen soldiers in the Ukrainian army say that unlike the US, they have no mortars or heavy weapons to deliver to Ukraine. They can only give their bodies. Soldiers say their lives as individuals matter little. On the other hand, many of the Chechen volunteers were already living in Ukraine either for work or to seek refuge from political oppression on their country. Now they have formed a contingent of volunteer Chechen fighters supporting Ukraine against Russian troops. The ultimate goal is fighting on the side of Ukraine against Russia to liberate the further eastern piece of land, the Russian-affiliated Republic of Chechnya. Many of his relatives support the other side, Moscow, or at least he has to say he supports it. On the other hand, Chechen fighters under the command of Ukraine hope that a victory here will cause a political crisis in Russia, which will overthrow Kadyrov. Most of the Chechen fighters in the Ukrainian army come from Europe, where they or their relatives took refuge during the 2 Chechen wars that followed the collapse of the Soviet Union. Some of them followed Kadyrov to the Russian side and began to fight for Moscow. In 2006, Moscow appointed pro-Russian leader Ramzan Kadyrov to rule Chechnya, and Kadyrov pledged support and loyalty to Putin and his invasion of Ukraine. Kadyrov was sent to Ukraine to fight for Putin, Chechen fighters loyal to Russia. This meant that it was now entirely possible for Chechens to fight Chechens. The Chechen rebellion was suppressed after Kadyrov's father, opposition leader Ahmed, switched sides. He was assassinated, but his son succeeded him. Some of the rebels fled to Europe, some of them made a living in different countries. As we mentioned, the Chechens who took up arms against Russia are of key importance in the Ukraine war. Currently, there are 2 Chechen volunteer battalions in the area, both pro-Dudayev and anti-Kadyrov. These battalions are Sheikh Mansour and Zokhar Dudayev battalions, which have been fighting against Russian-backed separatists and Russian forces in Donbass since 2024. Soldiers hope to live long enough to see Kadyrov, 45, also perish. Sheikh Mansour says that wherever Russia declares war in the world, his battalion will follow him to fight him. Now their only purpose in life is to take up arms against Russia wherever they may be. One of the 2 units fighting in the Ukrainian ranks, the Imam Mansur battalion, operated first around Kiev and the Severodonetsk, then moved to the Bakhmut front. Besides the Ahmed brigades, led by pro-Kremlin Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov, there are also Chechens fighting against the Russian army and the Ukrainian army in retaliation to Moscow, especially the Sheikh Mansour battalion in the Ukrainian army. Caucasian groups that have been operating in the Ukrainian battlefield for years also landed on the field. On the other hand, according to the news from the region, the Chechens who were forcibly recruited and did not want to go to Ukraine clashed with the units loyal to the leader Ramzan Kadyrov. A group that had previously opposed Putin's decision to mobilize soon came face-to-face with Kadyrov's militia. In short, pro-Ukrainian Chechens believe that if they defeat Putin in Ukraine, they will one day gain independence for their own republic. In fact, according to the Chechen fighters, if they had been helped as Ukraine was helped, Russia would not be here now, because the Western world has only now seen the face of Russian leader Vladimir Putin. As a result, we can say that the presence of Chechens on both sides of the war is interpreted as an indication that Chechnya is still in conflict with itself, while the actual clashes have reached their peak. In fact, this contrast culminated in the routine looting of Chechen settlements by Russian imperial troops in violent ethnic cleansing against Chechen civilians. During Joseph Stalin's rule of the Soviet Union, approximately 400,000 Chechens and ethnic Ingush were forcibly deported from their homeland in the North Caucasus. Up to 30% of the people died from the hardship and violence of the relocation until the survivors were allowed to return their lands under Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev 13 years later. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia brutally crushed a nascent Chechen republic. The first war of independence ended in a peace truce, but fell apart in 1999 after Russia's then Prime Minister Putin led a new military campaign allegedly to fight civilians in Chechnya. The fighters in this Chechnya, a republic in the far south of Russia, with the Russian federal forces, have lived through a long period of war, and the war has shaped them in very way. After all, the Chechens have now decided to support Ukraine and are fighting on the front lines. In short, Ukraine's military commanders have long said that there is no shortage of soldiers for the war, but they still recruited thousands of volunteers, including foreign citizens. Many, like Chechens, are refugees from Russia. Thank you for watching us.